Kochani, dzisiaj jesteśmy w Porto.
Słuchajcie, przyszliście na ten odcinek o Porto, więc gdzie najlepiej jest zrobić odcinek o Porto? W Porto, u jednego z najciekawszych producentów, więc idziemy teraz do Grahamsa, gdzie spotkamy André, to jest mój bardzo dobry kolega dziennikarz, który zrobi nam takie ABC o Porto.
Koniecznie oglądajcie. There you are. I got lost in the barrels. I'm so sorry. But I had some great port. I had like a 1962
Already?
and a 58 and an 1882.
Already?
But
No,
you're
I'm
not
just kidding, I'm
supposed
just
to
kidding.
taste it.
Yeah. Where are we, Andre? Where are we? This
We're
is
in a
amazing.
port cellar. It's a port cellar. It's a typical port cellar. We're in a city called Gaia, which is actually located in the south margin of the Porto district. And what happens here is that most of the port houses have cellars here. And the reason they have cellars here is so that they can age the wine in what they found out throughout the years to be the perfect place to age wine here. And of course, what happened in the past was that the wine was being harvested in the Douro. The region of the Douro is actually around 2 hours by car from here.
Yeah, we just came from there.
So you know how
we did
long
it in an
takes.
hour though.
Of course, now you can do it with a highway.
The highway is great though. It's so super. It's easy to.
But
actually
imagine
get
that in the past, the wines didn't have a highway to come here.
Yeah, I can
so what happened is that they had
like
to
carts
take, they had to
or
take
the
a
river, yeah,
they
exactly.
used to take the river in some boats that you can see here in Gaia. And what happened was that the barrels that we have here would actually be loaded with wine in the Douro and then put in these boats and brought here to be aged and then at some point to be shipped to England. And if you can imagine, the river was a rapid at the time. So a lot of wine, yes, a lot of wine was lost and a lot of people actually died in this process, making port.
What is this
age.
exactly? What's this
So what
marking?
we
What
have
does it
here
mean?
is, in this place we have many different types of ports. In these smaller barrels, we have a port that is a colheita. A colheita is a port from a single year. And so in this case, 1998, this was a wine that was harvested in 1998. But then it has been aging in these barrels since then.
Since then, so it's like 21 years old now.
Exactly.
In the barrel.
In the barrels. In these barrels are aging. And so if you look at the bottle of Tawny, colheita, you can actually see the year of the harvest in the front. But if you turn it on the other side, you can see the year that it was bottled.
Okay.
So you can see how fresh it is. For example, if you want to make a tawny, you use the smaller barrels, and then they can be there for 3, 6, 10 years or 100 years. And some wines that you can still have, of course, for 100 years in the same barrel. But then if you want to make the other style of port, if you want to make a ruby, they'll use some of the bigger oak casks that you have here. And the reason these ones are used to make ruby port is because when you use something this big, there's less contact with air, so the wine oxidizes less, which is what you want when you have a ruby port, that you want to be, depending on the style, you want to be bottled 2 years or 4 years after the harvest. So there's limited oxidation, but there's still some maturation, and then it goes to the bottle.
That's always something that fascinates me. It's like how actually people decide, you know, like they look at this and they say, okay, it's been 20 years in, we were supposed to bottle it, they try it, and he's like, no, it's not ready yet, or I think it will be better in 10 years, and let's keep it in the barrel.
But it
You
is
know,
like
it's
that.
amazing.
It is like that. The thing is that in a room like this, in a cellar like this, where you have thousands of barrels, master blenders know exactly what each of these casks has, and they taste them several times a year. So they can actually come here and say, oh, this seems to be ready to do a bottling. Of course, also depends on what the house wants to do. But the whole idea is that they know this as they know like a map. They have a mind map of everything that is being aged here, and they can decide, oh, let's do this because this is in a perfect condition to go to the market now.
Zamknięte?
No, czekaj.
Czekaj, a jakie ty masz rączki? Może, zobacz. Nie.
Nie no, ja mam krótsze rączki niż tylko.
Hey guys, where are you?
We're coming.
Sorry,
Here we
sorry,
are.
sorry. This is like a paradise for food, for
exactly.
port lovers.
This is a very special place. We're in the vintage room of the Graham's Lodge. And this is where they store the older vintages that again go back for a century, but a century where they have been aged in a bottle. So this is vintage port. It was harvested in a year, it was aged for 2 years, and then it was put in the bottle. And
So
it ages in the bottle
Yeah.
forever.
So the difference between colheita and vintage is colheita is aging in the barrels,
Yes.
and vintage is aging in the bottle.
Yes, 2
Exactly.
years after it was harvested, it's put in the bottle. If they have to evaluate, they have to test it and say, is this good enough to be a vintage? So they don't produce it every year. Maybe around 3 years, every 10 years. And if they decide it's good quality and it's deemed to be vintage, then they put it in the bottle and they age it.
And so this wine is still alive inside, and it's still aging.
Yes.
It just depends on when you actually
Vintage
drink
port
it.
is not a filtered wine, and so of course it's bottled with a lees, and so you have this organic material inside that helps it age. And of course, all of these wines are corked, so you have a very micro oxidation going on. But of course, it takes sometimes 50 years, 60, 100 years to age, and then you can see how it slowly matured, of course, in a perfect cellar like this, to come to something that is very,
Look,
very
and they have
special.
like
But this decade you declared in port already 3 vintages, yes?
This decade,
Yeah.
yes. So it's a very special decade.
Exactly.
And in the case of, for example, the Symingtons,
Yeah.
it was the first ever time in their history that they did 2 years in a row
Exactly.
of declaration, 16 and 17.
Okay.
Unique moment in history that we're here, of course. And actually, if you go back, it's interesting because you can actually think of the 77 and the 87 and the 97 and the 07 and the 17 as being some of the best ever made.
So they're like every
So
10
the
years.
7 has a special
7
meaning.
is the lucky number for
But the
ports.
77, that's the real lucky
Yeah.
number. But I'm still very worried that we're only looking at these bottles and the barrel,
Yeah,
and
too
we
much
still
talking.
haven't
We need
tried
to- we
anything
need to
yet.
get-
Come on,
we need to get
let's
to
go,
thinking. Let's
guys.
go.
Let's go and let's try something. Seriously. Oh, there she is.
Hey guys, don't
Oh,
taste
hi.
without me.
Where did you go?
I'll tell you later.
Now we come finally to taste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as you can see from the color, there are mainly 2 different styles of port. One is ruby, and it's this darker color wine. Okay. And the other one is tawny, and you can see it has this tawny color to it. Okay, so you can actually compare the two.
Yeah. Okay.
But then, of course, inside each of these styles, you have different styles. So if you start with the ruby is a wine that is made to age in the bottle. Okay, and you have
And it's not oxidized.
and it's not oxidized exactly. And so the main styles of wine inside ruby is you have ruby, which is a wine that is aged for 2 years or 3 years, and then you can bottle it, and it's the entry level wine that you can have. And from then you have ruby reserve. Of course, then you have a few more years of aging. But actually, when it starts getting really interesting, is of course when you go to special categories like LBV, which means late bottle vintage, and vintage port. And what's the difference between these two main styles? Vintage port is harvested in 1 year, and then it's bottled 2 years later. And after that, so just 2 years of aging in barrels, in big oak bags, yes. And then that wine, if it's deemed to be vintage, is bottled and is going to age in the bottle forever. And then of course you have the other style, which is late bottle vintage, which is a ruby style that is aged for more years, and actually between 4 years and 6 years. So it has a little bit more of aging in these big oak beds. And then of course when you try it, you would say it's more ready to be drink. Okay. Then we go to tawnies, and tawnies are, like you said before, oxidized wines.
Yeah. And this is my style.
And this is, I like it very much too. And this is a style, as you can see, that it has, it's more open in terms of color, and it has this orange color, this tawny color to it. And so how is this made, and how is it different from ruby? What happens with tawnies is that tawnies are kept in barrels so that they oxidize.
Smaller barrels.
Smaller barrels,
For
so
more
that
oxidation.
yes, so that it gets a lot of oxidation. A tawny would have like 3 years of aging, and then you can age to 9 years for a tawny, but it can actually age forever if you want. But then if you want to get into the special categories, like you have LBV and then you have vintage for rubies, you can actually get, for these, you can get to something like Colheita, which is a wine
That's
from
what we
specific,
saw.
yes, the barrels that we saw from a specific vintage.
Okay.
And then you have another special category, which is the 10 years old, the 20 years old, the 30 years old, and the 40 years old. It's normally the average of the wine.
One big question I think is, this is a fortified wine, right? So
Yes.
it's stronger than a normal wine. How does that happen?
So when you're making wine, so how is port made? The first thing is the grapes that make port come from vineyards that have been identified to be ideal to make port. And these vineyards have the IVDP, which is the institute that controls the production of port, has these rules where each vineyard is evaluated in a system that goes from A to F. So premium port is made from A-level parcels. So we got the grapes. So then you do, like you do in a normal red wine, you harvest the grapes and you bring them to, in the case of port, you bring them to a lagar. A lagar is normally a wooden thing. You can have different ones, but it's
Or
like
granite, right?
A granite thing,
Granite
thing, where the grapes are food trodden.
We actually saw
know,
some
so-
lagars that were 300 years old, right?
Yeah,
So we
yes,
had
yeah,
those.
very old. And you have groups of men going together.
And women
and
now.
women, group of, yes, and then they go, yes, of course, and then they go together, and sometimes they spend the nights, of course, in the cold of the night, doing that system where they're gently pressing with their bare feet the grapes, and then you do that, and at some point the wine starts fermenting. And then you start evaluating and start seeing how much sugar it has, how much you want, and everything. And at some point, you add.
And they ferment in lagars.
They ferment in lagars. And at some point, you need to stop that fermentation because, of course, you want the wine to have the alcohol that you want, but also the level of sugar that you want. And so you add brandy. Without taste, 70%, 77% alcohol.
Like strong
Very
alcohol
strong,
made
yes.
from grapes.
And what happens?
Which kills the yeast. Yeah.
Which kills the yeast, and then it stops fermentation.
And
Of the most.
is there a difference in the amount that you add? I mean, like, can you decide how much you want to add, or is there a specific limit?
It's normally it's more or less standard. It's more 100 liters per cask. So 100 liters per 550 liters.
Okay.
The reason that happened like that was that when the wine was being transported from port to England, they found out that by fortifying the wine, that the wine would deal with the trip better and would age
spoil
better.
it.
Wouldn't
Yes,
spoil
of course,
it.
it wouldn't spoil.
Yeah.
So you would protect the wine from all the oxidation and all these other things. And of course, at some point, they found out that it was actually tasted better. So why not make it like that?
Andre, enough talking, please. Let's drink something.
Let's drink. So let's start with this 6 grapes.
Yeah.
This is actually a ruby reserve in terms of quality. Very fruity, very interesting, very
Like a plum, something like that?
definitely some plums, some dark fruit.
Yeah.
But then you have this sweetness. Balanced with the acidity that gives all this pleasure, this explosion that you feel in your mouth. Again, a very good wine to end of the day, you're tired, you're home, and you just want to have a glass of something just to finish the day, and you have a glass of this, and it's just perfect.
Yeah, it's not exaggerated. It's not like
Not at all,
syrupy.
not at all,
It's not-
not at all. So now we do a test. You have your last glass,
Okay.
and the one
In the
two
middle.
glasses,
Okay,
yes,
yeah,
the
okay.
one in the middle. Try them.
Got it. Strong.
Oh,
Wow, what a difference, huh? Oh my goodness.
So what we're tasting here is actually 2 wines that are 17 years apart. So on the left, we have a Graham's 2000, so a classic vintage. So a wine that was harvested in 2000, and then again, like we said, it was bottled in 2002. And it was a classic vintage, so they decided to say it was a vintage port because of its characteristics, not just of the quality that it had at the time, but also of the potential to age. And as you can see when you taste this is a wine that has aged very graciously, very, very nicely. And you have all the flavors of the young port still, because it's still quite young, even if it's from 2000. But at the same time, it has already it's already matured. There's already some evolution that you can feel.
Much smoother than the first one, right? That's
course,
like
yeah.
much more balanced, but the smoothness in the mouth is like,
You still have
wow.
fruits like plums, but
Yeah.
it's more like smoked plum.
Yes.
And then you have the spices, like the spices.
Yes, you do. In this wine, you can definitely feel the spices. The other thing that you can feel in this in aged vintage port is you can feel the dried herbs of the Douro.
Yeah.
If you go there and you feel like kind of this area where you have all these herbs that are growing wildlife. Steva. Yes, definitely Steva. Very well. This is Steva that you can smell here.
Yeah.
Definitely if you put the nose here. What we're tasting on the right is something very special and very rare. This is a wine that is made from only 2 parcels, and it's called the Stone Terraces. You're using the 2 oldest parcels of this quinta to make this wine.
The whole nose is just different. It's like a very. I mean, I can still smell the plum, but it's like
There's a flower.
There's so much
flowers
flowers
going on.
there.
It's very rich. There's all these flowers going on.
Yeah, it's like a bouquet of flowers, you know, with a hint of.
This is
violets and iris
And this is a wine that you want to spend time just smelling.
Yeah. I would love to just leave you alone, guys, and go away with this wine. I never in my life had such a beautiful bouquet in the glass.
So this is actually a very rare wine. Of course, then it's priced accordingly.
Yeah.
And it's something very special. One of the most fantastic wines coming out of the Douro, and especially in 2017, which is the new vintage. One of the best wines of the vintage. They got 100 points from James Suckling recently.
Perfect one.
Perfect.
Wow.
Okay.
It's amazing. No, the mouth is just something out of this world.
I'm keeping this one.
Let's do the second.
Okay.
Yeah, that one.
Okay.
Let's do the 72.
And the 72.
72.
So this is
Now we
actually a
definitely
little
like
bit
the fish.
older than we are,
Yeah, exactly.
which is pretty amazing.
The wine that we have here is a 20 years old. And I find it to be one of the most interesting because it's almost a perfect balance between the youthness of a 10 years old and then the complexity of a 30 or a 40 years old.
Yeah, I have the same. My favorite tone is always 20 years old. Yeah.
20 is fantastic, and it's
The tonies are less sweet than rubies.
yes, you feel the sweetness less because of course you have the acidity and it's so
Exactly.
marked, and it has also the oxidative flavors, and so you don't feel the sweetness. You actually just enjoy the wine as a whole,
Yeah,
and you feel the freshness, of course, of the acidity.
Yeah. There's the freshness, but also the smokiness and it is
Yes, you have
like
all these characters of almonds and of dried fruits and all of these. Yes.
But
What's this then on the right?
the 72. It smells like hazelnuts and dried herbs.
This is a colheita port, and what it means is that it's oxidized like old tonics, but it's actually from a single year. What you have here is a wine from 72, and you can clearly see that it has this greenish color, of course, where you can see its age. But then when you taste it, it's totally different. You feel the aromas on this are so different from a 20-year-old.
After 30 seconds, it starts to taste like a coffee, like really a fantastic espresso.
Yes, but it's the same a fresh espresso.
Really,
if
very
they can
fresh.
have
This is
they
like
have this.
now there is this kind of coffee with tonic style.
A little bit of like
You have the freshness in that, so
yeah.
you can feel the freshness
Yeah,
here.
exactly.
Yes, but at the same time, you have this complexity. There's so much going on in this nose at the same time.
And
It's
the
almost like you don't
finish
want to
is-
drink it; you don't just want to smell it first.
Yeah. But I had the same with the vintage 2017. That the smell is so amazing that it's like a perfume. You want to put it on your skin.
And you're drinking something very special. It's from 1972.
Okay.
Thank you, Andre. I think that's.
Don't go away. We have something else. Hello, Emiliano.
I'd like to thank you for your visit. And
Thank
so
you.
I'm bringing the oldest wine that we have available here at the lodge for tasting. It's a single harvest, like you just tried in 1972. It's a bit older than in 1972. It's in 1963.
No way.
And so I really would like you to taste this wine.
Your hands are shaking.
Yeah, I'm always feel very emotional with this kind of wines. That's why.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank
Cheers,
you.
and thank you for having us here.
Yes, well, it was our pleasure.
Oh
You cannot split this.
no, I didn't.
It's impossible.
Yeah, I stopped at some moment. I don't spit it.
It's also from 1963. which for port wine is considered one of the best years ever.
You told us the 77 is the best vintage.
Yeah.
It is the best after 70, but before that,
Guys, I suggest we go out because I heard there's an amazing terrace
Yes.
here as well, so we can enjoy this
I
outside.
think I'll bring my
and,
glass.
Yeah, me too.
have a look at Porto, and we will take the glass with us.
Yeah.
Okay, let's
Let's
go.
do it.
Maybe the whole bottle?
Oh, the bottle.
it's made
So this is what this is a port tonic, you said, yeah?
yes, it's a gin and tonic made with port instead of gin.
Wonderful. That's amazing.
Yes,
It's
with
actually
white
very
port.
tasty.
It is very refreshing.
My love, why my life. My wife loves gin and tonic. We
She'll
should
love
we should
this.
skip
Yeah.
to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cheers.
Cheers. I'm just like I just want to drink it, you know. Well, Andre, thank you so
thank
so
you.
much.
Thank
We
you,
have to,
guys.
thank
Thanks
the
for being
house,
here.
of course, here, but that was
That was the
absolutely amazing.
best
You ne-
visit ever.
You have to come back.
Yes.
And you
It's
are
not
the
finished.
best port guide.
You have to come back. It's
Okay.
not finished.
Okay.
You have to
said
come
it
to
in
Poland
front of
as
the
I would love to.
Yeah.
You said it in front of millions of people.
We
you
will
know?
come back.
Oh, now you have to come back. Come, everyone. Cheers again.
Guys, so that was Port in Porto, or Porto. We hope you liked it. Comment, like, share, whatever. Just let us know if you want more of this type of videos from us.
And
And what?
come to Grams.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
come to
Grams,
Graham's Lodge. Visit in Gaia.
and we'll see you for the next episode. And remember, drink
Less
less
but better.
Exactly. Responsibly, but the new wave is less but better.
Yes.
See you next time. Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.